Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Zodiac Bennett, and today we're going to be talking about my biggest hopes for Campaign 4. Now, I have theoretically talked about a handful of stuff that could be considered hopes, like when and where I think it should be set, what the classes should be, things that they should do that were different from prior campaigns. However, that was all before the news that we got that Campaign 4 would be in a completely new setting, have a new DM, Matt Mercer is going to be a player, and it's likely going to be a different system than, what was happening in prior campaigns. So I have a new list of hopes for it moving forward, and I'm going to be telling you all them today. So I just want to say this now before getting into it. There might be some potential spoilers that, might pop up because I do tend to go on rants and stuff like that as I, make videos. I make tangents as I go. So if that happens, spoiler warning for, any prior campaigns, any prior miniseries, etc., etc. So yeah, spoiler warning, kind of loose, but just, putting it out there. I did warn you that there might be some spoilers for Critical Role content. Very vague spoiler, but spoiler warning nonetheless. So I feel like it makes sense to start with some of the new changes that they're making for Campaign 4, and I want to talk about Brennan Mulligan, and for me, I really hope he slows down. Now, in the past, especially with Critical Role content, he's only had 3 to 4 episodes to tell a story, and he tends to go really fast with whatever he's talking about in the moment because he knows he needs to blitz through it so he can tell an entire story that he has in his head and, tell a story with the rest of the players in the time limit that is given to him. He's literally been shackled with a 4-episode time limit for a while now. So for him to be able to have a way to have a longer story be told that isn't just 4 episodes is going to be great for him. And I really hope that he allows that length to really sit down and allow the moment to exist in the moment. He can't just immediately jump from the next thing. He would, introduce a plot point and then instantly jump to the next plot point a lot in other mini series and stuff like that. It's probably my biggest complaint that I have about Brennan being a DM. Now, I don't have experience with him on Dimension 20 stuff. I could never really get into Dimension 20 myself, and I know that they go on for, anywhere between 15 to 20 episodes per, so I haven't seen what he's like when he has more time. But with it being a Campaign 4 for Critical Role, it means it's likely going to go 100 episodes, and I really hope he allows it to breathe. He allows the moment to be the moment and not to sort of just immediately jump from one thing to the next. He should really just allow things to settle and be slow sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. I would really appreciate it if he just slows down. So next, I want to move on and talk about the world. I started with the new DM. Let's talk about the new world. And I just want it to be different from Exandria, yet still be, a true fantasy setting. I don't want it to be some sort of, vegetable world or, a high school or something like that, which are 2 of his most popular things that he made over in Dimension 20. And I really just don't want some sort of weird abstract thing like that. I want it to feel like a fantasy setting, but I want it to feel distinct from Exandria, if that makes sense. I really want this to not be an Exandria light. I want it to be Brennan's own thing, but I still want it to have that, feeling of fantasy, and it can be low fantasy, it can be high fantasy, it could even have some sort of, steampunk elements. I was thinking maybe he could, lean truly into Eberron and go into the Eberron setting like that, because Eberron still feels fantasy. And same with Spelljammer. There's a bit of sci-fi in Spelljammer as well, but it still feels fantasy. I don't want his world, whatever he makes, to be something weird and abstract like a vegetable world, right? That's my big concern with the whole world that they're making right now, which is him making it a vegetable thing or, a high school thing. I don't want those things to be in a Critical Role campaign. That's stuff for Dimension 20, and he can keep it over there for Dimension 20. I think if we're going to have a campaign being set for Critical Role, it needs to be a fantasy of some variety that isn't something that's a mild joke, if you will. No vegetables, no high schools. Let's be fantasy, please. And if you like those things, that's great. Keep it over there. Keep it on Dimension 20, please. So now I'm going to move on to what is probably going to be considered the biggest thing for this next setting or campaign moving forward, which is the system itself. Now, for a while, I've been sort of on the camp that they should stick with Dungeons and Dragons in some form or fashion, whether it be stick with 5e, whether it be do the 2024 rules, whether it be to sort of grab the best of both worlds and use whatever they can to sort of make their own 5.5, if you will. something along those lines was something that I wanted to see for a long time out of them, and they should just stick with Dungeons and Dragons. But with them switching to a new world, initially, I thought they would stick with Exandria, and then that way it made more sense to stick with Dungeons and Dragons. But if they're going to be in a new world, I see no reason for them to stick with anything but the game they made themselves, which is Daggerheart. There is no good reason that I can see personally, unless Wizards of the Coast pays them an absolute fuck ton of money to stick with Dungeons and Dragons. So, my hope for Campaign 4 is Daggerheart. I know that's going to sound very surprising for a lot of people, but realistically, after seeing what a lot of you have said about, the world change and everything like that, it makes virtually no sense for the game to continue being Dungeons and Dragons. At least, outside of Exandria. If they do some Exandria stuff in the future, that should be Dungeons and Dragons reserved. But if we're not going to be there and we're going to be somewhere completely different, it makes way too much sense to promote and play the game you've spent the last year and a half hyping up. It just makes sense. So, and not to mention, I think it'd be a lot of fun to see how a long-form version of Daggerheart goes. We've seen 4 episodes from the Menagerie. We've seen 8 episodes from the Age of Umbra. Let's give it some more time to breathe and see how long a Daggerheart game can be stretched out for. Can it survive 100+ episodes, or will it be boring after 50? Let's find out. I think this is the perfect way to do it. You're already experimenting with other stuff like a new DM, a new world. Fuck it. Let's try this stuff out. So now I'm going to move on from all of that stuff. Now I kind of want to talk about the cast. And specifically, I want to talk about Matt Mercer first. The first hope involving Matt Mercer is that he has literally zero involvement with making the world they're going to be playing in. Because every single time they did a game where Matt was allowed to play in Exandria, he had to play some sort of dummy character who wasn't smart enough to truly understand the greater world around him, so he didn't influence the game with his actual knowledge. I would love for him to be able to play a character that isn't informed by his overwhelming understanding of the world. He needs to just have zero involvement whatsoever with the world so he can truly be a player. Matt being a true player would be awesome. I was super excited for him to play as Dariax, only for Dariax to be something that, it felt like he was handcuffing himself. He couldn't truly play a character that I feel like is befitting of Matthew Mercer. Matthew Mercer is a highly intelligent human being, and he should be playing a character who isn't a fucking himbo, if I'm being totally honest. It's okay to play that every once in a while, but Dariax is his biggest, thing that he's done as a player outside of Garin, who himself wasn't a very smart individual. Was Garin wise? Sure. But he wasn't a super smart individual who would, be like the head of a wizarding school or something, which is how I envision Matt quite heavily. Matt's 2 most notable NPCs, who many consider to be his DMPCs, are both wizards. One is Aurora, and the other is Essek. So it makes no sense for a lot of us when we look at Dariax, a character who is completely different, which might have been what he was going for, but also was truly a limitation because he didn't want to hamper Abria's story or Abria's game that she was making for them. So he had to play that dumb character of Dariax. And then the same thing sort of goes with Garin, although there was a bit less written in stone about the time frame that was that era at the end of everything, or at the end of the war. Why is it spacing out in my mind? A Calamity. At the end of Calamity, not a whole lot was written about it in stone, so realistically he could have probably played a more intelligent character, but he ended up playing Garin, which, again, not a bad character by any means. Neither was Dariax, but it's definitely a limitation that he put on himself so he didn't, spoil the world for other people. I want Matt to not have this limitation placed on him for Campaign 4. So continuing on stuff that I kind of hope happens for Matt, I don't want to talk about class for the character all that much. I don't really want to say, if I think he should be this or that right now, because we don't know what system it's going to be. However, there is one thing that I would like Matt not to do when it comes to character creation, and that is play a third dwarf. Okay? In every miniseries he's been a part of that has some form of, long standing within the world, not just like a one-shot or something like that, he has played a dwarf in Dariax and Garin. And he loves dwarves, and I get that he loves dwarves, and it's really fun for him to play dwarves. So when he gets to play something every once in a while, him playing a dwarf makes sense. This is going to be a long form campaign. If we're going to be seeing a long form campaign, I want him to try something a little different. That's it. I just don't want him to be a dwarf. I want him to be something else. An elf, something like that. Maybe if we're going to be seeing some Daggerheart stuff, he could be a clank, or he could be a fairy, or he could be a fungrill or a ribbit. I would love for him to play a ribbit. That'd be awesome. But you see my point. My point is simply I don't want him to be playing and hampered down by a dwarf character again. Not that I think dwarf is bad by any means, but I would really like him to try something different on camera. That's it. So my last hope for Campaign 4 is to not mess with the cast. The core 8 is needed for this to be considered Critical Role Campaign 4. If you're going to replace any of them, it shouldn't be called Critical Role Campaign 4. Adding to it is 100% fine. We've seen people be added to it to the point where many people were like, add Robbie Damon forever, right? People were asking for that all throughout Campaign 3. Where's Robbie? To the point where he was there to finish that game. So, adding Brennan Mulligan's fine. Moving Matt over to the player side so we have 4 and 4 on each side of the table, and then Brennan be the DM. Beautiful. Having a guest every once in a while, perfect. However, if one of the core 8, if 2 of the core 8, 3 of the core 8, however many of the core 8 aren't going to be there for Campaign 4, I would rather not have Campaign 4, or I'd rather them not call it Campaign 4. So for me, the biggest hope for Campaign 4 is the core cast of 8, these beautiful people you're seeing on the screen, stick around. If they're not going to be there, if we're going to lose people for whatever reason, they want to take a break from playing tabletop RPGs, they want to, work more on their voice acting stuff, they want to, spend more time with their family, they have health issues, all of these things are completely reasonable stuff. If they want to step back, that's perfectly fine. I just feel like it's disingenuous to call it Campaign 4 if that's the case. Because it's not Campaign 4. It's something new if you're changing too much of the status quo. You could already say making Brennan be the DM and Matt be a player is something new enough to where you shouldn't call it Campaign 4. But it's still reasonable to do so because the cast is mostly, completely all there. But if they're not all there, it's not Campaign 4. So that's my big hope for Campaign 4, is that everyone in the cast, the core 8, which will soon be the core 9 with Brennan, are there. So there you have it. My hopes for Campaign 4. I know some people are probably going to disagree with my last one, saying, if they want to step away, they should be allowed to step away. Absolutely. I totally agree. Just don't call it Campaign 4. Anyway, I think, I feel like for the most part, people are going to agree with me on most of these. It's until that last one, maybe the Daggerheart one, some people will disagree with, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. Let me know what your biggest hopes are for Campaign 4. And yeah, I will see you guys on Friday for whatever video I make next. Peace.